Well, this is Shreddies. He was rescued back in November in Lincolnshire and he's now been brought to the Somerset and Dorset border to start a brand new life in 1,800 acres of land. And in fact, 15 miles of hedgerows have been planted specially for him and 43 others to start a new life.
So we came here in 1998 and there were a plethora of hedgehogs when we arrived. And slowly but surely the number has decreased and recently the number fell really quite catastrophically. So we wanted to make a difference and get some hedgehogs back here. Since I've been here, I've noticed that the amount of chemicals used on the land by farmers in the pursuit of cheap food, everybody wants cheap food, we've waged chemical and mechanical warfare against nature. And that's immensely destructive, and you only have to look at the insect population and the bird population and the hedgehog population to know what damage we've done.
We take two poo samples from each hedgehog before we release them to make sure they're not carrying any parasites or pathogens, and this site is particularly acceptable mainly because of the type of trees that are growing here, but also because it is completely organic. We know we can guarantee that the hogs are going to be released here. They have everything they need to sustain a good life. There's no chemicals, it's well away from roads, there's water available for them. It's what we call hedgehog heaven.
Now, hedgehogs like Shreddies here have been declining, and over the past 20 years their numbers have dropped by around 50%. But placing them in new areas of the countryside is controversial. Some people say, well, we do need to repopulate the population. Others say they should be staying local.
We try and get it back to its original place that it was found, unless there is a danger there, unless the reason that it came in was because of the surrounding it was found in, if that makes sense. But we do try and populate lesser populated areas. Most of the time we do that with ones that we can't find a home for, or with hoglets, because sometimes we'll get between 4 and 6 hoglets from a litter, and to put them all back in one place is not as good, but and it helps dilute the gene pool, to be honest. But it's but we limit the amount of distance that we travel.
Well, we used to always put adults, and we do with all our animals, we always put adults back to where they came from, because they know their site, they know where they can find food, they know where they can find cover. And obviously there's also probably members of their family that they also want to join up as well. And with the babies, we used to find new sites. But then there's always that question of, if there isn't an animal there of that species, why is there not an animal of that species? And I think a lot of people don't realise the amount of area that hedgehogs need. They range 1 to 2 kilometres. So a really nice, good garden isn't enough. It needs to be a whole corridor from different areas and feeding grounds. And also, as I said to you before, it's the health factor that you're moving one animal from another area to another area which may have pathogens that the hedgehogs in that area may not have the I'm just trying to think of the word, the protection from things, because it's not a pathogen they've come in contact with before.
I suppose in terms of hedgehogs, you have to think about, this isn't a solution to the hedgehog problem. Our hedgehog numbers have dropped, by about a third in the last decade. And the reasons why that has happened has got everything to do with how we manage land and our garden and the impacts we've had on hedgehog food and things like that. So it isn't about, sort of hedgehogs as individual animals saying getting disease, so there's no point in moving them unless you're moving them into an environment they can survive in. So that's the first thing is, when you brought them down here, why were they not here in the first place, and have changes been made to that environment to make it now okay? So that would be one concern is, if you're going to bring them into an area where all the hedgehogs were lost for good reasons, they're just going to die. So that would be awful. helpful. So that involves a good ecologist, someone who's really looked at that area and made sure it's appropriate. And I know Pauline's talked to you about, say, the number of hedgehogs you might put in one area. The little animals with quite big individual territories, they don't have friends. They only meet really to reproduce. So we need somebody good to have looked at all that. But the other part of your question is about translocation, and there's really good international standards on translocating animals, so moving animals from A to B, either as part of a reintroduction process or for other reasons. And when we move animals, we move the animals themselves, but we also move their own little ecosystems of parasites and bacteria and antibiotic resistance and genetic resistance to disease. So you're moving a whole little mini ecosystem in the animal, and you need to make sure that's the right thing to do. So I would hope those animals have been disease screened really carefully to make sure that they're not carrying infections. But however carefully you do that, they'll yourself, when you go on holiday, you get a tummy upset. That's not necessarily because you've been poisoned, it's just your body's not used to the bugs in a foreign country. And it's the same, you bring those hedgehogs in, they won't be used to the bugs that are there, but equally the hedgehogs that might live there won't be used to what those hedgehogs could bring. So there are a whole internationally recognised disease screening protocol that we should use before we move animals. And, we do that at Secret World for the key things we're worried about. So TB in badgers or bowel fluteworm in otters, those sorts of things we would think about. So I hope the same has happened with these animals. But if you put together all the good stuff, you disease screen them and you had a good ecologist looking at the site they're going into, then potentially a good thing, yeah.
The theory that's held by some rescue centres and hedgehog hospitals, but our thinking is, why would you want to put an animal back into an area where it was either being distressed or the habitat wasn't acceptable or it had been injured? We like to think that the efforts we put in to make the hedgehogs well, to kill their parasites and give them the best chance of surviving, we find it, our theory is that it's better to put them into a controlled environment where we know they're going to be fit and healthy to the best of our ability. Putting them back by the side of the M25 is not perhaps such a good idea. It's a bit dangerous. You wouldn't put a child back into a dangerous situation. You would want a child to thrive in a loving, caring home. This is what we choose here for our hedgehogs.